talks about the business of Baltimore Ravens football. Ravens salary cap guru and organizational analyst. You hear him on 105.7 The Fan. You hear him throughout your airways and all types of media platforms. You know the name, the one and only Russell Street Report's own cap guru, Brian McFarland, joins the Flex Zone podcast. Everybody, please, if you could, put your hands together and give him a nice warm welcome to the Flex Zone podcast. What's going on, Brian?
Hey there. How's everybody's evening so far?
Doing great, man. How about yourself?
Good. Can't complain.
Well, let's get straight to it, Brian. For those who don't know who you are, let them know what you do in your own words and just a little bit about yourself and kind of how you ended up doing what you do today.
Sure. So my salary cap involvement goes all the way back to the purge year of 2002. We were all still new to the NFL again, and the salary cap was new to us. And all the Baltimore Sun could explain was they had to cut everybody for salary cap reasons. And nobody explained what that meant. So at that point, I started digging into it, and over time was back then because it was message boards, it was before Twitter, and was just posting things on that. And Tony Lombardi from Russell Street Report picked me up and said, "Hey, you want to write some articles?" And so I started writing articles. That was 2006, and I'm almost 20 years into it now. Next year will be 20 years. So I just try to get the numbers together. Twitter being down earlier today was kind of made it hard, although the Ravens didn't make any moves, so I guess it didn't matter much. But try to get the numbers together, and there's the kind of a little cottage community of us salary cap guys out there. So communicate with guys from other teams, and honestly learn something new every day. There's always a little nuance here or there that I wasn't aware of.
Can you talk about real quick how the Ravens salary cap is at this present moment after the Ronnie Stanley contract? What the numbers are telling you, or if you can tell me?
Yeah, I'd love to, but we haven't seen the full numbers on Stanley's deal yet, and I'm kind of surprised. We know the gross numbers, as in the largest numbers, not that they're terribly ugly or gross that way, but 60 million, 44 million guaranteed. That 44 million is going to be paid in those first 2 years. How that breaks down is still to be determined, but without knowing if his signing bonus is, what his salaries are, and whether there's void years added, it's still too hard to say. So right now, and there's still a couple other things, but right now they have about 10.5 million in cap space. Stanley's deal is going to take up most of that. They've got to figure out the RFA tender for Darius Washington, the low tender, which means if another team signs into an offer sheet, the Ravens can match, but there's no draft pick compensation since he was undrafted. That's a little over $3 million. And then if they want to ensure he's here, they can use the second round restricted free agent tender, but that's over $5 million. So neither of them are cheap, but they have to make that decision. Or of course, if they can get an extension done before all teams need to be under the cap Wednesday at 4:00 Eastern. So they still got time to get that figured out.
What is the first move you think the Baltimore Ravens are going to make?
Well, I would, if it's re-signing one of their own, I would think Pat Ricard would be the most likely one. Washington would be, because there's a little bit of a deadline there if they could get an extension done there. But Ricard shouldn't be terribly expensive. I mean, not a lot of teams use fullbacks anymore. Kyle Juszczyk just got released by San Francisco, so that puts a name out there too that teams might look to. I mean, obviously they're different cats as far as their skill sets. The one team I'd be most worried about with Ricard would be, let's go say San Diego, Los Angeles Chargers. But they kind of have their own project, Pat. They turned a defensive lineman, I think he's even bigger than Ricard, into their fullback this last year. And I don't know if he's as good as Ricard, but my guess is they'll kind of stick with that. But obviously with Jim Harbaugh out there and Greg Roman, obviously, that seems like a team that would be interested, but I don't think that's going to happen. So being that he's a fullback, I think he'll be the next guy, the next signing. Outside signing, who knows?
So I know we're talking about the Ravens cap, but can you explain the cap, for example, with like the Dallas Cowboys, who have a lot of money tied up into Dak Prescott, have money tied up into CeeDee Lamb, and the next person would be Micah Parsons if they decide to re-sign him. But that's three men taking up majority of your cap. How is it wiggle room around Dallas or another team in their position being able to sign other people? Because it seems like the Philadelphia Eagles are able to just keep signing people, but Dallas seems cap restricted. So can you explain that a little further for us?
Yeah, I mean it's somewhat a different it's different philosophies, which philosophy you want to use. The Ravens certainly are more on the more conservative end of the cap. The Eagles are on the other extreme. The Cowboys are more obviously on the conservative end. Now the Cowboys did just restructure Dak and restructured CD, so they actually created 35 million, I think. It might have been more than that. So restructuring contracts is the way you spread the money out into future years. You're buying cap room this year for less cap room in the future. So and that's where what the Eagles do a lot of. They use a lot of void years, which obviously it worked. And for them it worked. Other teams have used a lot of void years. Cleveland, Jacksonville, New Orleans. It hasn't worked. So I mean, you got to be good. And I mean, the Ravens front office is pretty good at talent acquisition, but it is an all-in approach. Because of those void years, Jalen Hurts, his contract ends in 27 or 28, and the following year there's 97 million in dead money from the void years. That's if he's not extended, but if he has a catastrophic injury or something like that, that's going to be a mess. So it's what philosophy you want to use. The Ravens have started using some void years. They did with Odell Beckham a couple years ago, and the part of the reasoning behind that was they were trying to create as low cap numbers as they could for their players, to have enough cap space that if somebody came in with an offer sheet for Lamar, they were going to be able to match it. So they did that, and it was kind of noticed to the world, so to speak, or at least the other 31 teams, that if you're coming after them, we've got enough cap flexibility that we're going to match. So don't waste your time. And obviously nobody did. And a month or so later, the Ravens and he reached a contract where now he's, I think, ninth. He was number one then, and as far as quarterback contracts, now he's down to ninth.
Yeah. So is that kind of what happened with the Denver Broncos in their situation with the Russell Wilson contract, where they just kind of took the loss as far as the dead money, so that way the following year, like this year, they're able to sign more people?
Yeah, I mean they when they released him, they really took because there was some still fully guaranteed salary in there too. So they took the big hit last year. He's still on their books this year, but I want to say a more reasonable 20 million in dead money or something like that, not the 50 or 60 that it was last year. So I mean that's what happens with contracts, and that's what happens with contracts that fail. Obviously, you can look at Deshaun Watson's contract in Cleveland. With all the injuries and obviously and just his poor play, to be honest with you. That's turned out to be an albatross for them, and that what they just keep kicking the can down the road, hoping to spread it out as far as they can. But they're going to have a big number in the next year or two. Obviously, they're not moving off of him this year, but in 26 or 27. I think they'll probably release him next June to spread that money through between 26 and 27, which is what Denver did with Wilson. They did a post June 1 release, which allowed them to split it up over last year and this year. Usually the second year's number is bigger, but last year, because he had 30 some million in fully guaranteed contract. I mean, that's kind of crazy that you pay a guy 30 some million not to be with your team anymore.
Now, how often do you see? Sorry, Val, those will be the last one. How often do you see like something like that? Because you named Russell, you named Russell, you named Deshaun, but won't is this kind of like a trend now for teams, or how will that be like in the future? Because usually we see a lot in sports where a team will follow another team's pattern, and I'm sure that Russell, Deshaun, these won't be the last two contracts where teams are eating up majority of their money, spreading it over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, there have been others. When Philadelphia traded Carson Wentz, they were hit with like 30 some million, which was a lot for then, because that was what, 5 years ago or so. Matt Ryan, same with Atlanta, when they traded him, they took on a big chunk of. So it's going to be quarterbacks generally, although the way some of these non-quarterback contracts are going, getting over over the last couple of days, 40 million. So those could be difficult too at some point. But I think the biggest thing is the huge increases in the cap over the last 2 years has made it easier for teams to do that without tearing everything else apart. You're going to have to take a step back. You're not going to be signing a lot of outside free agents and things like that. And you might have to let a couple guys go you don't want to of your own. But I think you're going to see that, because I mean, they're just, even the middle quarterbacks making 40 million a year, that becomes problematic because he's a middle quarterback. He's not a star. And if he turns out to play like an average quarterback, then, you're at some point as you set your contracts up, they usually go up in cap numbers each year. And you get to those latter years, you're kind of like, okay, well, this is too much now because he's still the average quarterback he always has been.
Go ahead, Bravante.
I wanted to know how is the dead cap calculated?
Sure. So what happens is, and to try to do the numbers is off the top of my head, but if you sign a guy to a 5-year contract and you have a $5 million signing bonus, that bonus is prorated over the 5 years. So it doesn't all count in the first year. It counts $1 million in each of those years. So if you sign him, and if his first year salary is 1 million, then even though he's getting 6 million in the first year, he actually only counts 2 million against the cap. 1 million in the salary and 1 million in the first bonus, $1 million bonus proration. If you cut the guy after that, this is where the dead money comes in. So if you cut the guy in the second year, you have to still account for those last 4 bonus prorations because you paid him the money. If it's future salary, you're absolved of that as long as it's not guaranteed because you cut him. But for money you've already paid out, you have to account for that. So if that player gets cut in the second year, all those bonus prorations accelerate into that year. So all 4 of them would count in that year, and that's dead money. So you would have 4 million in dead money right there. So and then you add void years in, which spreads the money out can spread the money out a little further in some cases. They used that on Beckham because it was a 1-year deal. So using that same, not using Beckham, but using that same example, if you gave the player a 1-year deal for $6 million, normally all 6 would count in that because there's no years to prorate. If you add void years, then you add years to prorate. So again, we go back to the 5 years. So again, he goes back to a $2 million cap number instead of 6. And then again, same thing happens but void years do the same thing. They all accelerate the next year. So it's kind of the same thing. But void years are generally on either much bigger contracts or 1-year deals, because those 1-year deals are, if you sign a guy to 1 year, $10 million, without void years, the whole 10 million counts in that 1 year. And that's sometimes hard on the cap.
My question is this. We've seen that the cap has jumped up this year, like about what, $15 to $20 million. How does the league how do they pretty much determine how the cap is going to fluctuate out throughout the years?
Sure. So the cap is, and now the Players Association and the NFL have some leeway on this, and there's always some things they have to negotiate before the final number comes out. But the cap is really set. It's a mathematical formula based on league revenue. Certain things from league revenue are included, certain things are not. Certain percentages of things are included, certain percentages are not. And then the players get 48.5% of that, whatever. So that they calculate the league revenue, and again, that's not exactly what the league is bringing in, but it's based on, again, that calculation, and then they divide it by or multiply it by the 48%, and that's how you get to the salary cap. So now, the reason there was some delays this year and some negotiation is when the cap went down in 2021 after COVID, they borrowed from future years. So, I mean, that cap went down 30 some million, if I remember correctly. It probably would have gone down like 60 or 70, but they ended up borrowing from future years. So the last couple of years cap should have been higher, but since they borrowed from it, they were repaid. So that, if it went up 30 million, I'm just using 30 million, but if they borrowed 30 million, then they took 10 million off of the last 3 years cap, for instance. So that's where there's some negotiation, and they also, both sides don't like the huge jump, and I don't think they can avoid it now with the gambling money and this newer TV contract now, but they generally don't like huge jumps because then teams base their contracts on a huge jump, and then if next year it doesn't go up as much, you've already planned out your contract for the 5 future years or whatever it might be. So they try to keep it relatively smooth, and teams know that. So if it goes up by 20 million this year, you can expect it to go up by 20 or 21 or 22 maybe next year. But if it went up by 30 this year, then teams might be, okay, it's going to go up by 30, and then goes by 10, and now players are getting cut, which the Players Association doesn't like. So they care about that too. You would think, okay, we'll get bigger contracts, that's great, but when the guy gets cut 2 years later and doesn't see half the money, it's not so great. So that's where they have some leeway to kind of smooth it out sometimes. But that's basically, it's all based on league revenue.
You think there'll ever be a time where there's fully guaranteed contracts in the NFL?
I think Deshaun Watson really shot that one in the rear end.
Boy, oh boy.
Now it could, it's one of those things you're going to have the right timing. So, Lamar's contract, let's just use Lamar as the example. His cap number this year is 43 million. It jumps to 72 million or 70. I'm sorry, almost 75 million next year. So they're going to have to redo that contract. They're going to extend it, add more years and kind of smooth that out. He'll get plenty of money, but and most of it will be guaranteed because that's just the way these contracts work. He's young enough; he's going to see the next 5 years of any contract he plays under. So it's going to take. So now, fingers crossed, the Ravens win the Super Bowl next year. Lamar's MVP of the league, MVP of the Super Bowl, and the Ravens are like, okay, this $72 million cap number is too big. We've got to reduce this. Well, Lamar's got all the leverage in the world to say, okay, well, you kind of say when we have these negotiations that it's pretty much guaranteed anyway. Well, let's make that a fact and do that. So it's going to take a guy like that. I mean, if Lamar had come off of a Super Bowl win before he signed this, when he was going on the franchise tag, if he came off a Super Bowl win and another MVP at that point, he might have gotten fully guaranteed. Because I don't know how you couldn't at that point, especially after Watson got it, and obviously that's because that's flamed out so spectacularly. I think anybody trying to get it now, except in a very, very unique case, Lawrence Taylor is at his prime, and coming off of a 23 sack year or whatever his, I remember his top one, maybe it was 21. But that kind of player, if it's going to be a non-quarterback, but I think it's got to be those circumstances, at least until the next collective bargaining agreement, because it is really difficult if that contract goes south, and we're seeing with Watson. I mean, you're just screwed. I mean, you're not just screwed for 1 year; you're screwed for 3 or 4 years. So that's the cautionary tale of it. And he probably wasn't the right guy. Well, clearly wasn't the right guy to get it. Lamar might have been the right guy to get it. It doesn't say anything bad about anybody. It doesn't seem like he's ever going to get in any kind of trouble or anything like that. It's that kind of guy that it's going to take. And Lamar could be that guy. He's just got to win us a Super Bowl, and we'll see. We'll go from there.
So basically, Deshaun messed it up for everybody.
I think so. Yeah, I think
Cleveland.
Yes, that's what I was
Cleveland.
going to say. Yeah,
Because I'd have taken the money too. Because I'd have took the money too.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. If they offered, there's no way he was going to say no. I don't deserve it. But yeah, they offered that, and I mean, the story was that was it Atlanta and somebody else were down to the final. It might have been New Orleans. It was the final two, and he told Cleveland they were out, and they spun back around and said, "Okay, fully guaranteed." He's like, "Okay, you're back in," and that was that.
Yeah. But since we're talking about fully guaranteed contracts, do you think that there will be a time where the contracts are across the board fully guaranteed, like how they are in like baseball, basketball, in the NFL eventually?
That's going to be tough because you've got so many players. I mean, the NBA's 15 players on your roster, I believe. Baseball is 26 or 27 now. I don't know what hockey is, but it's just really difficult when you have that many players. They would have to totally redo the way the salary cap works, because or if it is fully guaranteed and you're cut at some point, that's that dead money I was talking about earlier, which would normally count against the cap. But maybe there's some mechanism that if it doesn't, or they, dead money. Dead money would probably not have to matter anymore. I mean, because even undrafted free agents, are getting. I mean, it's not much of a bonus, but that's good. It adds up over time. So they'd have to really redo the whole way the cap works, and I'm not sure either side wants to get into that. I mean, that's starting from zero, and while the cap has its warts at times, I mean, it's something that's worked pretty darn well for almost 30 years now. So I would think that would be a hard sell, probably the players want the fully guaranteed contracts, but I don't know that a blanket fully guaranteed is something they would push for.
What do you think for these Baltimore Ravens? EDC says we don't have any money like that. Granted, because of Lamar's contract, Mark Andrews' contract, a couple other people's contracts that are big numbers. What can we do to open up cap room to sign our rookies that's coming in? Our rookies that's coming in, and also maybe one or two good free agents. Like, what can we do?
Sure. So there's really about 5 or 6 contracts. I mean, usually there's more. There's really not. Usually there's 3 or 4 guys. You're like, okay, they're getting cut, and that's going to create a decent amount of cap space. There really isn't this year, so that makes it a little difficult. But there's 5 contracts that make or break, so to speak, this offseason. We just talked about Lamar a little bit. Ideally, you want an extension now to spread out this year and not have to worry about 72 million or 75 million cap numbers in 25 or 26 and 27. You just want to get that issue taken care of. But if not, and they want to create cap space, they can restructure his deal. It's going to increase that 75 million up to about 80 for both of those years. But it could create I think it's about 16 million in cap space this year. So an extension would probably create about the same. So that's one deal. Marlon Humphrey, pretty much same thing. Extension or restructure. Ideally, it's an extension because that smooths it out on your terms. It doesn't create a bigger cap number in 26 for him, which is his last year of his deal. And it secures him beyond 26. So that those two are extensions or restructures. Roquan Smith would be a restructure. I believe that's about 9 million could be saved there. That's at any time you restructure, you're adding to the player's cap numbers and the rest, for the rest of his contract. So you're eating into cap space in the following years. Adafe Owe, because he's on the 5th-year option at about 13 million. That could create an extension there. Now the prices went out. The prices today were a little higher from some guys than I thought they would be. So, but you could secure him beyond this year because it's basically a 1-year deal this year on the 5th-year option. But they might rather see him play out, let this year play out, and might cost him more next year. And then everybody's going to complain why he didn't sign him last year. But a lot of when he's been mentioned on Twitter or X, it hasn't been a very positive. Yes, let's get him extended. So, but we'll see if people remember that they said that a year from now if he puts up 15 sacks next year, and they got to use the franchise tag on him. So, Derrick Henry's the other big one. DaCosta sounded very positive about getting something done. That would he's only under contract for next year. You probably could add 2 years to that, figuring he'll be good at least for 2 more years. I mean, the guy keeps himself in incredible shape. Obviously, it could be good for beyond that, but at some point, Father Time's going to take its toll. So, but if you extend him for 2 years, that's 3 more years. So, if you get 2 of the 3 out of that, it probably is a good deal. Plus, it'll reduce this year's cap number. I think that was 5, or was that 6? But so Mark Andrews was the other one. And right now, I don't know. They're so quiet. I mean, you hear all these. If they're going to trade him, you would think the other team would want to try and work out an extension, or at least talk to him about an extension before making the trade. Those things usually seem to get out to the press. We've seen a lot of those over the last week. So, I really thought trade was going to be the number one. It's pretty 50-50 he'd be traded. Now I'm going to say it's 20-80 he gets traded. Now, of course, as soon as we get off of this, we'll hear that they just got traded. Always seems to be the way it happens. But but I mean, I think at this point he's staying, and then it's a question of, do they extend him? Do they extend Likely? Because I don't think you're going to extend both, and I don't think either of them want to be here to be second fiddle to the other. So, I mean, that's been the most intriguing one. But I think we all thought, and maybe they might have an offer out. They might be out there saying, we want a 3rd-round pick, and if you're not giving us which I don't think they're going to get, but if you're not giving us a 3rd-round pick, then he's staying. Because the way the trades have been, if you get a 4th, I think you're happy. But they may value him even on 1 year, and he'll be a free agent next year and walk. But maybe they value him more this year than a 4th-round pick in this draft. Because they feel obviously we're on the cusp, or we're so close, and not having Andrews would reduce, would certainly change the offense.
Speaking of a Ravens player we may not have, what are your thoughts about Justin Tucker moving forward?
Yeah, they've obviously been very silent on that. The reports were pretty damning, not saying that they're accurate, but they are. The story seemed pretty well sourced, and the fact that they uncovered tweets going back to 2016 that mentioned it from just random people saying, yeah, I heard Justin Tucker's been banned from so-and-so, or from several places. I don't remember exactly the wording, but that adds some credence to it, that at least the rumor was out there then. So it's not like somebody's just making this up now for some reason. So, so if the Ravens wait for the league, I mean, they're going to have to do something by September, if not sooner. They'll certainly be bringing a kicker in, whether it's a draft pick or an undrafted free agent, or whether they sign a veteran for the minimum just to have another kicker here. I initially thought they would be releasing him. Cap-wise, it doesn't make sense to do it without the post-June 1 release designation, which they could do. You have 2 of those to do before June. You don't get the cap relief until June, but the player, it's really for the player. He just gets out on the free agent market in March, as opposed to being on the free agent market in June, which there isn't one anymore. And March is where all the money is. So, and they're already definitely using one of those on Marcus Williams. Tucker, there is one available for Tucker for that. But I don't know. It sounds like they really want the league to step in and suspend him first. But I mean, Rashid Rice was in that, that street racing thing, and he still has. And that was last off season, and he was, I know he went on IR, but that wouldn't stop them from suspending him. So the NFL moves at a snail's pace. So if the Ravens are waiting for the NFL to do something first, I'm not sure why, but so I wish I had a better answer than that. I think it's all a little puzzling to me. Now and let's face it, he didn't have a good year last year. It makes it easier to say. If he was all pro Justin Tucker last year, then maybe maybe they're, the way they're handling this makes a little more sense. But because he's 35 and coming off of a bad year, it seemed to me that, just whether it's for not purely PR sakes, but PR sakes as well, because it all factors in. I thought they would have moved on, or at least announced they were moving on, and then we can until Wednesday cut him, because then we can use that post June 1 release. But here we are.
With the people that we lost today, I think we lost 4 Ravens. Are we getting any comp picks from those 4?
We should get 3. Board, which was the most recent one that was reported. His numbers were 2 years up to $6 million, which up to generally means there's incentives in there, and the comp pick formula pretty much looks at just the base salary. So if there's $1 million in incentives in there, and just guessing, and the base deal is $5 million, he's going to be under the threshold most likely. So, but for the other 3, Pat McCarry, Brandon Stevens, both got deals bigger than I thought they would. Everybody is, granted, these days, but neither of them, while they both played a lot of snaps, neither of them were very stellar, to be honest with you. But at least for McCarry, and he's very versatile, obviously, but we saw John Simpson leave last year for a bigger deal than we thought, and the guy before that went to Denver, Ben Powers, went for a bigger deal than anybody thought would happen. So Stevens and McCarry will probably, assuming they don't get hurt, because part of the comp pick formula is how much they play next year with their new team, so it's based on snaps. But assuming they both were over 90% snaps this year, assuming they're in that range, I think they'll both be in 5th round comps. If not, they'll be the 2 of the top 6, and then Harrison should be a 7th. It's not a real big deal. This coming, which should be announced any day, but this draft we got a 4th for Queen, and a 5th for Clowney, and then 2 others. So that was a little better, but they were bigger names and obviously bigger deals. And obviously without Stanley, we weren't going to have a big, although the 2 did come in a little higher than we hoped. So we got to root for Stevens at the Jets, and McCarry who did McCarry sign with?
He signed with
Jacksonville.
Okay, I'm not
Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah, so we should hope that they stay healthy and play well, and that will help our make sure those 2 comp picks are 5ths, not 6th.
Well, Brian, before we get you out of here, what is next? We know the official league year starts Wednesday at 4 p.m. Kind of what is the timeline of what we can expect next from you, and what do you have cooking up on RussellStreetReport.com?
Sure. So right now, main thing is we're just waiting for those Stanley numbers to see, how the contract breaks down. So as soon as we have those will be on X. As we get closer to the draft picks, I'll have an article on how the draft pick, because it's a salary cap within a salary cap, so to speak. So I always have an article every year about how that works. And obviously any big signings we'll put out an article, but mostly this time of year it's on X. And one thing actually I thought of about Andrews, he does have a $4 million roster bonus due
March 20th.
It's the 17th, actually.
Oh, okay.
So that will be that's D-Day, so to speak. That's decision day. If they pay that $4 million, then he's gonna be here because they would have cut him or traded him before that. So that's kind of when we'll know for sure if we don't hear anything otherwise, if they don't come out and say it. But that's when we'll know for sure whether he's going to be here or not.
I don't want him to leave. I want him to stay at least for his last year. So hopefully,
yeah, I mean, they're definitely better with him, but it's just, unfortunately with the salary cap, a lot of times you do have to pick where you're going to allocate your resources, and then the fact that he likely and Kohler are all free agents after this year kind of complicates it, because it does seemingly force some kind of decision. And if they're going to get likely, they would be better off. If it's going to be likely, they'd be better off getting him signed now and not wait a year. Now that they could still keep Andrews around if they, did restructures or extensions with Humphrey and Lamar. But again, that's, you're kind of, you're what's a robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak, as far as the cap goes sometimes.
Brian McFarland, ladies and gentlemen, one more time, give it up for him. Make sure you check out his work at the RussellStreetReport.com.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you staying up late.
Appreciate you.
Yes,
we know you're crunching the
numbers, burning the midnight oil. Thank you for stopping by the Flex Zone. We're going to have to do this again soon before the season, once you get all the numbers and everything. And
Sure,
we'll be talking
anytime.
soon. Appreciate it, sir.
All right,
Thank you.
take
Once
care,
again,
guys.
everybody. Brian
Thank you,
McFarland
man.
Good night, man.
of the Russell Street Report joining us here on the Flex Zone. So big shout out to him.